Prologue. A Mother's Secret. The last hues of twilight bled across the horizon, a muted glow draping itself over the Ashford estate's weathered stone walls. In the growing dimness, the ancient house seemed to exhale its secrets into the cooling air. Shadows stretched long and deep, pooling in corners and creeping up the ivy-clad facade, their movements almost too deliberate to be natural. Inside the small study, a single enchanted candle flickered with steady, golden light. Its glow cast dancing runes along the walls, illuminating the shelves stacked haphazardly with leather-bound tomes, cracked vials, and forgotten relics. The scent of parchment, ash, and ink wove itself into the air, faintly undercut by a metallic tang that hinted at old magic stirred awake. Serena Ashford stood at the desk, her breath shallow and quick. Her fingers, trembling yet precise, flew over the pages of an aged, leather-bound book. The glyphs etched into its surface glowed faintly, shifting as if alive, their meanings locking into place only as she skimmed past. Around her, fiery symbols materialized midair, hanging in suspension before snapping into the walls and windows with a soft hiss. Each one strengthened the protective wards encasing the room, their rhythmic hum a lifeline against the pressure building outside. The rumble began softly, distant and uncertain. But as Serena worked, it grew louder, a low, throbbing pulse that resonated in her chest, shaking the quills on the desk and rattling the panes of the arched window. The shadows clinging to the glass twisted and writhed as though alive. Her fingers paused, clutching the edges of the desk for balance. She glanced over her shoulder toward the source of the noise, her eyes narrowing. Her dark hair, streaked prematurely with silver, hung loose around her face, damp with sweat. "Too soon," she murmured, the words laced with fear and frustration. Her voice barely carried over the hum of the wards. "They shouldn't have found us yet." Her gaze dropped to the object lying in the center of the desk, a key. It glowed faintly, its surface etched with fiery, shifting symbols that seemed to pulse in time with a heartbeat. The air around it shimmered with residual heat, distorting the runes carved into the wood beneath it. Serena reached out, her fingertips brushing its surface. Warmth, alive and protective, met her touch. Her eyes softened, the rigid lines of her expression easing for just a moment. "You're her only hope," she whispered, lifting the key as though it were fragile. Her voice trembled, betraying the weight of her words. "Protect her, no matter the cost." The key pulsed brighter, its symbols flickering with sharp bursts of orange and red. In the light, fleeting images seemed to form. Fire consuming an obsidian spire, a shadowy figure cloaked in void, and a girl standing at the center of it all, her hand outstretched toward the flames. Serena's grip tightened, her jaw clenching. "Not yet," she said to the key, her tone fierce now. "Not until she's ready." The rumbling grew into a steady roar, and the study trembled as if the entire house were straining under an unseen force. The shadows pressing against the windows thickened, darkening to a slick, inky black that absorbed the candle's light. Cracks formed along the panes, spidering outward with the hiss of encroaching frost. Serena turned back to the book, her movements sharp and desperate. A soft glow enveloped her hands as more glyphs materialized, each one snapping into place with a sound like fire catching dry parchment. The wards flared, momentarily brightening the room and forcing the shadows to recoil, but only briefly. They surged again, hungrier now, their edges sharpening into claw-like points. Serena's breath hitched. She slammed the book shut, clutching it to her chest as the key's heat intensified in her palm. Outside, the roar ebbed for just a moment, leaving behind an eerie, predatory silence. Her gaze darted toward the door, the quiet pressed against her ears, unnaturally thick. Her pulse pounded, loud and insistent, as if her body already knew what was coming. The candlelight flickered. A whisper slithered through the room, low and guttural. It spoke no words, only a sound that carried the weight of malice. Serena stood tall, drawing a deep breath. Her fear didn't vanish, but it hardened into resolve. She slid the book into a satchel at her side and held the key close to her chest. Its warmth steadied her, a quiet reassurance against the cold seeping through the walls. "They'll never touch her," she murmured. Her voice, though quiet, carried steel, As the first crack splintered the air, a sound of glass and stone succumbing to force, Serena stepped forward, her form silhouetted by the flickering wards. The runes pulsed brighter, matching the key's rhythm, their combined light pushing back the dark for just a moment longer, but only just. The wards cracked first. A brittle, crystalline sound echoed through the study, cutting through the charged hum of magic. Serena froze, her breath caught in her throat as the runes carved into the walls began to flicker. Their golden glow dimmed, faltering like dying embers, until only a faint pulse of light remained. The silence that followed was worse. The shadows surged, their forms twisting like smoke caught in a violent wind, but they were far more than vapor. Tendrils extended from their inky mass, sharp as jagged glass and dripping with a viscous black liquid that hissed as it hit the floor. The air around them crackled with cold, their presence turning the room's heat into an oppressive chill. They moved with unsettling intent, each motion calculated, their edges shifting between fluidity and solidity. A low, guttural hiss emanated from within them, not a sound, but a feeling crawling along Serena's skin like icy needles. When one lashed out, its tendrils struck the wall with the force of a blade, leaving long, frosted gashes in the wood. These were no ordinary shadows, they were void-given form, hungry and relentless. It wasn't the stillness of calm, but a void, oppressive and wrong, as though the air had been siphoned from the room. Shadows pressed against the window panes, undulating like restless waves. Frost spread along the glass in delicate, jagged patterns, the tendrils racing toward the edges as though propelled by hunger. The first window shattered. The sound erupted like a gunshot, shards sprang inward as the frost-covered glass succumbed to the pressure. Shadows spilled through the jagged hole, slithering and curling along the floor like living ink. They hissed as they moved, their whispers coiling through the room, each syllable dragging ice along Serena's spine. Her pulse quickened, the thrum of her heartbeat loud in her ears. Tightening her grip on the key, she stepped back, her boots crunching softly on the scattered glass. The shadows surged, recoiling briefly as they neared the flickering light of the wards, but pressing forward with renewed purpose as the glow dimmed further. "Not yet," Serena murmured, her voice low but steady. She raised her free hand, flames sparking at her fingertips, their golden-orange light piercing the gloom. The warmth chased away some of the chill, but not enough. Another window exploded, then another. The air filled with the sound of shattering glass and the dull thud of stone splintering under unseen force. The shadows multiplied, pouring into the room in thick tendrils, their edges sharp and jagged like shards of obsidian. They moved with intent, surrounding Serena in a tightening circle. A sharp hiss broke through the cacophony, and one of the tendrils lashed out. Serena reacted instinctively, her hand snapping forward as a burst of flame erupted from her palm. The fire roared to life, its shape twisting and growing into the form of a phoenix. Its golden wings spread wide, embers scattering into the air as it let out a piercing cry. The phoenix dove, its fiery form colliding with the advancing shadow. A brilliant flash illuminated the room, revealing the shelves, the scattered glass, and Serena's strained expression. The shadow recoiled, hissing as the flames consumed it, but more surged forward, relentless. Another phoenix formed at Serena's side, then another. They circled her protectively, their fiery forms casting flickering light across the study. But for every shadow they repelled, more appeared, rising from the corners of the room and creeping through the shattered windows. Serena's hands trembled as she summoned another phoenix, the flames licking at her fingertips with a searing intensity. Her skin reddened, blistering in places where the heat lingered too long. She gritted her teeth, ignoring the sharp sting of blood as it dripped from her nose, each drop sizzling as it hit the floor. Her reflection in the cracked window caught her eye, a face she barely recognized. Silver streaks in her hair spread like wildfire, the once subtle lines on her face deepening with each burst of magic she conjured. The price of her power was written across her body, but she could not stop. Not now. Not when Leora's life hung in the balance. Serena's breathing grew labored, her fire magic flaring erratically as the shadows pressed closer. One lashed out, slipping past the barrier of flames to strike the satchel at her side. The impact sent her stumbling back, the key slipping from her grasp and landing with a heavy thud on the desk. A voice cut through the chaos, low and resonant, dripping with menace. "You cannot hide forever, Serena." The shadows parted, their writhing forms giving way to a single figure. Cloaked in darkness, their silhouette was sharp and angular, the edges blurred as though they were not entirely there. A void-like energy radiated from them, cold and suffocating, swallowing the light that dared to touch them. The figure stepped forward, the shadows at their feet writhing in submission. Their voice, soft yet commanding, reverberated through the room. "The child's destiny will not be denied." The shadowed figure tilted their head, the void-like energy radiating from their form intensifying. "The Ashfire line has always burned brightly," they said, their voice soft but laced with venom. "But it has never endured. Your defiance is nothing new. Generations of your kind have tried to resist the cycle, and all have failed." They stepped closer, their silhouette flickering like a distorted reflection in broken glass. "She will awaken him," they continued, their tone almost reverent now. "The Ashfire blood has always been the key. It is woven into the fabric of these realms. Whether you fight or yield, the outcome remains the same." Serena straightened, drawing herself to her full height despite the ache settling in her limbs. The flames around her flared brighter, the phoenixes circling with renewed vigor. "You will not touch her," she said, her voice unwavering. The fire in her eyes burned as fiercely as the flames at her fingertips. "I will burn the realms before I let you awaken him." The figure tilted their head, a mocking chuckle echoing from the void. "Your fire burns brightly," they said, their tone almost amused, "but even flames succumb to the void." The air grew heavier, colder. The remaining wards flickered one last time before shattering in a burst of light. The shadows surged forward, their tendrils lashing out with renewed ferocity. Serena raised both hands, summoning every ounce of magic she could muster. The phoenixes screeched, diving toward the advancing darkness in a final, desperate assault. Each impact sent waves of heat through the room, but the shadows reformed almost instantly, closing in from all sides. Her breaths came fast and shallow, her vision blurring at the edges. She could feel the cold creeping closer, the oppressive weight of the void pressing against her magic. But even as her strength waned, her resolve burned brighter. Her gaze flicked to the key, still glowing faintly on the desk. Its fiery symbols pulsed in time with her heartbeat, a steady reminder of the hope she had vowed to protect. Not yet, she thought. Not while she still had breath. With a final cry, Serena raised her arms, her flames exploding outward in a brilliant, all-consuming inferno. The light consumed the room, swallowing the shadows and forcing the figure to step back, their form flickering like a distorted reflection in broken glass. The flames receded, leaving the study in shambles. Books lay scattered across the floor, their pages singed. The air was thick with smoke, the acrid scent of charred wood mixing with the lingering chill of the void. But the shadows were not gone. They lingered at the edges of the room, retreating but not defeated. The figure remained, their voice cutting through the haze. "This is only the beginning," they said, their tone cold and certain. Serena did not reply. Her gaze remained fixed on the key as she reached for it, her fingers brushing its warm surface. She could feel its steady pulse, its silent promise. And then she turned, striding toward the hidden door at the back of the study. Behind her, the shadows began to stir once more. The hidden chamber glowed like the heart of a dying star. Ribbons of molten stone carved into the walls pulsed with fiery glyphs, their rhythm mirroring Serena's strained breaths as she descended the narrow staircase. The heat clung to her skin, oppressive and alive, like the room itself was bearing witness to what was about to unfold. The destruction above echoed faintly through the stone, muffled but insistent. Cracks splintered the silence like distant thunder. Serena didn't flinch, though her trembling hands betrayed the weight she carried. In the corner of the chamber, cradled within a circle of protective runes etched into the floor, lay Liora. The toddler's chest rose and fell with the deep, even rhythm of sleep, her small frame wrapped in a soft, threadbare blanket. The faint glow from the runes cast a golden sheen across her face, softening the sharp edges of the world outside this moment. Serena hesitated at the threshold, the key warm and pulsing in her hand. Her gaze lingered on her daughter, her expression flickering between fierce determination and a sorrow so deep it threatened to crack the fragile mask she wore. The chamber hummed with power, ancient and unyielding. The runes carved into the molten walls flared brighter as Serena stepped forward, their light painting her features in shifting shades of orange and red. The air tasted of charred wood and ash, and every breath came heavy with the scent of molten rock. "You'll forgive me one day," Serena whispered, her voice barely audible over the pulsing magic that thrummed around her. Serena crossed to the pedestal at the center of the chamber. Its surface was smooth obsidian, etched with grooves that glowed faintly, as though anticipating the key's arrival. Serena hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the slot. The key pulsed, its fiery symbols shifting, flickering in rapid succession. Serena's fingers tightened around it, and she closed her eyes. "Stay hidden," she murmured, pressing the key into the groove. "Stay safe. She will find you when the time is right." The runes lining the walls pulsed erratically as Serena placed the key into the pedestal's groove. The glowing symbols flared brightly, then dimmed, as though struggling against the weight of the shadows pressing from above. Cracks spidered along the chamber's molten walls, and the air grew heavy with tension, vibrating with the strain of ancient magic holding fast. The cocoon surrounding Liora shimmered faintly, then emitted a soft, mournful sound, a high, keening cry like that of a phoenix. The sound pierced Serena's heart, a haunting echo of the sacrifice she was making. Serena stepped back, her hands trembling as the chamber's light fought to repel the encroaching cold. "Stay strong," she whispered to the key, her voice breaking. "Stay safe." The chamber responded instantly. The runes carved into the walls flared to life, their glow so brilliant it burned away the shadows clinging to the corners. Lines of molten light snaked outward from the pedestal, connecting to the runes encircling Liora. A golden cocoon of light rose from the floor, surrounding the sleeping child with an unyielding barrier. Serena exhaled, her shoulders sagging under the weight of the moment. She knelt beside Liora, brushing a stray curl from the girl's forehead. Her fingertips lingered for a moment, her expression softening despite the tension thrumming through her body. "My star," Serena whispered, her voice trembling. "Forgive me. I couldn't give you a normal life, but you'll shine brighter than anyone, I promise." Liora stirred faintly, her tiny hand curling around a corner of the blanket. Serena smiled, though tears slipped unchecked down her cheeks. Above them, the destruction grew louder. A sharp crack reverberated through the chamber as the shadows forced their way into the hidden sanctum. The runes on the walls flickered but held. Serena rose, her gaze hardening as she turned toward the entrance. Shadows slithered down the staircase, coiling along the edges of the walls like vipers seeking their prey. Frost spread in their wake, steam rising where the cold met the heat of the chamber. The figure emerged slowly, stepping into the molten light with an almost deliberate ease. Their form flickered, cloaked in darkness that absorbed the glow of the runes. "I wondered how long you would run," the figure said, their voice low and resonant, dripping with venomous amusement. Serena raised her hands, fire sparking to life at her fingertips. The flames danced, casting the figure's silhouette in sharp relief. "You'll regret following me," she said, her voice a quiet snarl. The figure chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "You cannot protect her forever. Her destiny is woven into the fabric of these realms. She will awaken him, whether you fight or yield." The shadows surged forward, but Serena was faster. A phoenix erupted from her outstretched hand, its wings unfurling in a blaze of gold and orange. It soared toward the figure, its cry echoing through the chamber as it collided with the advancing darkness. The explosion of light and heat forced the shadows back, but only briefly. They reformed almost instantly, twisting and writhing as they closed in once more. Serena conjured another phoenix, then another, each one diving into the mass of shadows with unrelenting ferocity. The chamber trembled, the runes on the walls flickering under the strain. "You will not touch her," Serena shouted, her voice ringing with raw defiance. The flames around her hands burned brighter, hotter, their intensity forcing the shadowed figure to halt. The figure raised a hand and the air in the chamber shifted. A wave of void-like energy surged forward, colliding with Serena's flames in a violent clash. The force of it drove her back a step, but she held her ground, gritting her teeth as the fire and void warred for dominance. "She will find her path," the figure said, their tone unyielding, "but it will not end as you hope." Her gaze darted to Liora, still cocooned in the golden light of the protective runes. Her lips softened into a faint, wistful smile, the kind she had reserved only for her daughter. For a fleeting moment, she was not a mage locked in a battle for her life, but a mother recalling the first time Liora had smiled, the way her tiny fingers had curled around Serena's thumb. "Shine bright, my star," she whispered, her voice trembling but filled with a quiet strength. Turning back to the shadowed figure, she let the memory fuel her final act. Her flames surged higher, hotter, burning with a brilliance that made the void recoil. As the heat consumed the room, Serena closed her eyes, her heart steady with the knowledge that she had done all she could. With a final surge of strength, Serena pushed the fire outward, engulfing the shadows in a brilliant inferno. The heat was overwhelming, the light blinding, but when it cleared, the figure still stood. Serena's breath came in ragged gasps, but she did not falter. "Not while I still stand," she said, her voice a whisper, but it carried all the weight of her will. The shadows hesitated, wavering as if uncertain. The figure's form flickered, their silhouette blurring at the edges. Above them, the cracks in the stone deepened, the chamber shuddering as though the estate itself sensed the battle's toll. Serena spared one last glance at Liora, her expression softening. "Shine bright, my star," she whispered. The flames around her surged, filling the chamber with golden light as she turned back to the figure, ready for the final stand. The study was unrecognizable. Flames licked up the walls, devouring shelves of ancient tomes and sending cascades of embers into the air. The fire spread hungrily, unchecked and wild, yet its light barely penetrated the oppressive darkness coiling in the center of the room. Serena stood in the midst of the inferno, her silhouette wreathed in flickering gold and orange. Sweat dripped down her face, cutting tracks through the soot staining her skin, but she held her ground. The heat was suffocating, the air thick with smoke and the acrid stench of burning wood. Her breaths came fast and shallow, each one a struggle against the furnace surrounding her. Across the room, the shadowed figure loomed, their form distorted by the rippling heat waves. The darkness that clung to them seemed unaffected by the flames, an unnatural void that consumed all light. Frost spread along the scorched floor beneath their feet, a jarring contrast to the searing heat. "You're wasting your strength," the figure said, their voice smooth and mocking. The shadows around them writhed in response, hissing as they reached toward Serena. "A mother's love is a weak shield, it won't save her." Serena's eyes narrowed, the fire in them burning brighter than the flames around her. She raised her hands, summoning another surge of magic. Fire erupted from her palms, roaring to life as it coalesced into the form of a phoenix. The fiery bird spread its wings, embers raining down as it let out a piercing cry. "You're right," Serena said, her voice steady despite the strain. "Love isn't a shield." She thrust her hands forward, sending the phoenix hurtling toward the figure. The flames consumed the shadows in its path, illuminating the room in a brilliant flash. "It's a weapon!" The phoenix collided with the figure, exploding into a wave of heat and light that sent the shadows recoiling. But the void reformed almost instantly, the figure stepping through the flames unscathed. "You fight with such fire," they said, their tone almost amused, "but flames can only burn for so long before they turn to ash." Serena didn't respond. Her focus remained on the figure, her magic flaring as she conjured another phoenix, then another. The birds dove toward the shadows, their cries echoing through the study as they collided in bursts of light. Each explosion forced the figure back a step, but the effort was taking its toll. Her legs trembled beneath her, her vision blurring at the edges. She could feel her magic waning, the well of energy she had drawn from all her life running dangerously low. The figure tilted their head, watching her with a predatory stillness. "How long will you keep this up?" they asked, their voice soft but cutting. "You're fighting a battle you've already lost." Serena's lips curled into a faint, defiant smile. "Maybe," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I won't make it easy for you." She took a step forward, flames erupting around her in a blazing aura. The heat intensified, the fire consuming what little remained of the study. The shelves crumbled, the walls blackened, and the ceiling groaned under the strain. "You don't understand, do you?" the figure said, their tone shifting to one of quiet disdain. "This isn't about you. Your defiance is meaningless. She will awaken him and the realms will fall. You're nothing more than a flicker in the wind." Serena's smile didn't falter. Her hands trembled as she raised them one last time, her magic responding with a surge of heat that made the air around her shimmer. "Then let's see how brightly I can burn." The fire roared to life, consuming her completely. The flames spiraled upward, forming a fiery vortex that filled the room with blinding light. The figures shielded themselves with a wave of void energy, but even they faltered under the intensity. The explosion came without warning. A deafening roar shook the estate as Serena channeled the last of her magic into a single, devastating burst. The flames erupted outward, engulfing the study in a fiery inferno that devoured everything in its path. The heat was overwhelming, the light blinding. For a moment, there was nothing but fire and fury. When the flames finally receded, the study was gone. In its place stood a charred ruin, the walls blackened and crumbling, the air thick with ash and smoke. The shadows had been forced back, their presence reduced to faint wisps clinging to the edges of the room. In the center of the destruction, a single figure remained. The shadowed figure was battered, their form flickering and unstable, but they were still standing. "The flames may have taken her," they said, their voice quiet but seething with anger. "But the child remains, the prophecy is far from finished." They turned, their form dissipating into the lingering shadows as they retreated into the night. The night hung heavy over the ruins of the Ashford estate, the sky above barren and starless. Smoke curled lazily into the air, mingling with the acrid scent of ash and charred wood. The estate, once proud and sprawling, was reduced to smoldering rubble, its silhouette jagged and broken against the faint glow of lingering embers. The devastation was absolute. Walls that had stood for generations lay scattered in jagged heaps, and the skeletal remains of beams jutted skyward, still glowing faintly with residual heat. The ground, blackened and cracked, radiated a deep, unnatural chill, as though the shadows that had been driven back lingered just beneath the surface. In the center of the destruction, a single ember flared, brighter than the rest. A lone feather drifted down, glowing with a soft golden light. It landed gently atop a mound of rubble, its edges curling as it burned, until only a wisp of smoke remained. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint crackle of embers and the occasional groan of settling stone. Then, from the depths of the ruin, a shadow stirred. The figure rose slowly, their movements deliberate as they stepped over the fractured remains of the study. Their form flickered, wavering at the edges as though barely holding together. The darkness that clung to them seemed thinner now, fraying like worn fabric, but their presence still carried the weight of menace. They paused, their gaze sweeping over the ruins with an almost detached curiosity. The fire had left its mark, but it had not done enough. "The flames may have taken her," the figure murmured, their voice low and sharp, slicing through the quiet. "But the child remains." They turned their gaze toward the hidden chamber below, their expression unreadable beneath the shroud of darkness. "The prophecy is far from finished." The words lingered in the air, heavy with promise and threat. The figure turned, their form dissipating into the shadows that pooled among the rubble. The faint hiss of retreating darkness was the only sound they left behind. Beneath the destruction, deep within the hidden chamber, the air was still thick with heat. The runes carved into the molten stone walls glowed faintly, their rhythm steady and unbroken. At the center of the room, the pedestal stood untouched, its obsidian surface unscathed despite the fury above. The key rested within the groove, its fiery symbols shifting lazily. It pulsed with a soft, rhythmic glow, like a heartbeat, casting flickering light across the chamber. The golden cocoon that surrounded Liora shimmered faintly, its surface rippling as though reacting to the chaos above. Liora remained undisturbed, her small chest rising and falling with the deep, steady rhythm of sleep. The light of the runes bathed her in a warm glow, chasing away the lingering shadows. The chamber's silence was comforting, protective, but there was an undercurrent of tension, an awareness woven into the magic that held the space together. The runes pulsed brighter for a moment, as though the room itself were taking stock, ensuring the child and the key remained safe. Above, the ruins began to cool, the embers fading one by one until the estate was shrouded in darkness. The quiet stretched, broken only by the faint whisper of the wind, carrying the scent of ash across the fields. From the rubble, a soft sound emerged, low and mournful, like the cry of a phoenix fading into the night. It echoed briefly, a final farewell to what had been lost, before it too was swallowed by the silence. The Ashford estate lay in ruin, but beneath the debris, the faint glow of the key remained. It pulsed steadily, patiently, as though waiting for the moment when its light would be needed once more.